It was a calm Saturday morning in Atlanta. The sky was clear, the sun was gentle, and the terminal hummed with the usual pre-flight buzz. At gate 12, a well-dressed black family walked up quietly. Father, mother, son, and daughter. Calm, respectful. The father wore a dark navy coat and carried a sleek bag. The mother held a small gold gift bag for the grandmother they were flying to see, turning 90 that weekend in Seattle. The children stood close, their posture polite, their eyes curious. They weren't late, they weren't loud, they had first-class tickets. But in less than a minute, everything changed. The gate agent barely glanced at them, didn't scan their tickets, didn't ask a question. She simply pointed to the end of the terminal and said flatly, "Economy's boarding over there. First class isn't here." The mother stayed quiet. The daughter's grip on the gift bag tightened. The son's brows furrowed. And the father, calm, composed, simply said 5 quiet words. "I'm going to make a call." No shouting, no scene. 3 minutes later, boarding stopped, and the woman who thought she ran the gate, she was no longer in charge. The gate grew quiet, not silent, but still, like something was holding the air in place. The family hadn't moved. The mother, Olivia, stood behind her children, her hand resting gently on her daughter's shoulder. The boy, Marcus, about 15, held onto his backpack straps, eyes forward. And the father, James Carter, stayed calm. Calm like a man who'd seen this before, but never let it define him. He stood off to the side, pressed a single button on his phone, and made the call. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't look angry, he just stated facts. Gate 12, denied boarding. All 4 tickets valid, no reason given, no scan check. We'll wait. Then he hung up. The gate agent, whose name tag read Lisa Brennan, rolled her eyes, muttering just loud enough for a few people to hear. Always a phone call. Unbelievable. That's when the phone behind the desk rang. "Yes, sir." "Yes." "Understood." He turned to Lisa, his voice low but firm. "Stop boarding. Right now." She blinked. "What are you talking about?" "That was corporate, regional. They said hold the flight immediately. Someone's coming." Passengers in line started murmuring. Some stepped aside to peek at what was happening. One woman quietly pulled out her phone and started recording. Others whispered, pointing, not at the family, but at Lisa. Within 2 minutes, 2 men approached the gate, one in a sharp navy suit, the other wearing a red-striped operations jacket. Lisa straightened. She put on her customer service smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. The man in the suit was calm, but unmistakably in charge. His badge read, Daniel Whitmore, Director of Flight Operations. He didn't even look at the line of waiting passengers. He walked straight up to the counter. "Miss Brennan," he said, "step away from the desk." Lisa blinked. "Sir, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. That family—" Daniel raised his hand. "Did you scan their tickets?" Lisa paused. "I scanned too. They lit green, but—" "So you scanned too. They were valid. And you still denied them boarding?" She hesitated, eyes darting toward the family. I didn't recognize them. I thought—" "You thought wrong." He tapped the terminal and confirmed. "James, Olivia, Marcus, and young Ava Carter, priority elite members. Row 1A through 1D. No errors, no issues." Lisa stood still, her lips parted. But the moment had passed. Daniel turned to the junior agent. "Michael, resume boarding. Let the Carter family through first." Michael nodded and stepped aside. James gave a respectful nod, gently guided his family forward. Not one of them looked at Lisa as they passed. They didn't need to, because every person watching, every single one, knew exactly what had just happened, and it was only just beginning. As the Carter family walked down the jet bridge, the air behind them hung heavy. Passengers whispered, not about what the family had done, but about what they hadn't. No shouting, no threats, just stillness and 5 quiet words. Back at the gate, Lisa Brennan was still standing behind the counter, her smile long gone. Her cheeks burned, but her pride wouldn't let her step away. She folded her arms, watching the line shrink as passengers boarded one by one. Each glanced toward her, sharper than the last. Some looked confused, some disappointed, and some, worse, looked amused. Then came the second sting. Luis Gomez, the red-striped ground supervisor, approached quietly. He didn't yell. He didn't raise a hand. He simply handed Lisa a printed slip. Please report to Crew Lounge B after the flight. You're being pulled from this rotation pending review. Lisa stared at the paper. You're kidding, she muttered. Over a misunderstanding? Luis didn't answer. I've been here 8 years, she snapped. You think that man made one call and now I'm the bad guy? Luis looked her in the eye. You didn't scan the tickets, Lisa. They didn't look. She stopped herself, but it was too late. Luis's expression didn't change. He just pointed gently toward the break room. You'll be contacted by HR before end of day. She stood there stunned. For the first time in years, she felt powerless. Not because of a rule broken, but because, deep down, she knew what she had done. Not intentionally, not with cruelty, but with something quieter, something more dangerous. Assumption. On board, the first-class cabin had settled, but it wasn't the usual atmosphere. Flight attendant Rachel Monroe, a veteran of 15 years, moved quietly through the aisle. She had seen tense boardings before, but this had weight. The Carter family sat in silence. James glanced out the window, one leg crossed over the other. Olivia leaned over, adjusting little Ava's seatbelt as the girl hugged the gold gift bag like a lifeline. Marcus stared straight ahead, eyes calm but unreadable. Rachel stepped closer. Can I offer you anything while we finish pre-boarding? James turned to her, polite but distant. We're all set, thank you. She nodded, but before she turned, Marcus looked up. Is she still back there? Rachel hesitated. She is. Marcus blinked once, then looked back down. In the rear crew seat, Lisa sat stiff, trying to focus on her breathing. She kept repeating the same phrase in her head. I was just doing my job. But something inside her knew it wasn't true. She hadn't followed protocol. She hadn't checked the names. She had decided on instinct that this family didn't belong up front. And now her instincts had put her in the very seat where she used to send new hires. The observer seat, the quiet seat, the one where people waited to be reprimanded, reassigned, or released. 30 minutes into the flight, Rachel received a direct message on her tablet. 5 words. Expect contact from executive office. She froze. That message didn't come through often. In fact, she had only seen it once before, involving a senator's family in a near lawsuit. She looked toward James Carter, still silent, still composed. But something about the stillness wasn't passive. It felt like a pause before a verdict. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Nolan Reed had just finished reviewing a call log. He called over the intercom to his lead flight attendant. Rachel, can you join me up front? A few minutes later, Rachel stepped into the cockpit and closed the door behind her. Captain Reed pointed to the comm screen. Corporate wants eyes on this flight. Passenger 1A is James Carter. Rachel nodded. I figured it out an hour ago. He's not just platinum elite, the captain continued. He's a private investor, top level, the kind of name that doesn't show up unless something has gone very wrong. Rachel exhaled slowly. It has. Back in seat 1A, James finally turned to Olivia. Did she remind you of anyone? Olivia gave a sad smile. Too many, honestly. He nodded. I didn't want to make the call. I know, she said gently, but I had to. You didn't do it for us, Olivia whispered, looking at their children. You did it for them. And just then, for the first time on the flight, James allowed himself to feel the weight of it all. This wasn't about ego or revenge. It was about a message that needed to be heard by everyone who'd ever been silenced with a smile. 37,000 feet in the air, the world outside the plane was silent, just endless clouds and open sky. But inside the aircraft, something had shifted. James Carter hadn't spoken in nearly 30 minutes. His fingers rested on his knee, his breathing calm, but every so often, he'd glance at his son. Marcus wasn't reading, he wasn't napping, he was just waiting, watching, learning. James knew that look. He'd worn it at 15 himself. It was the look of a young man beginning to understand the world, and how often it failed to see him for who he was. Rachel returned to the cabin with a fresh round of drinks, her steps a little slower now. She glanced at James, then Olivia. Something in her posture told them she knew more than she let on. And then quietly, James spoke. "Excuse me, Miss Monroe." Rachel stopped, her eyes wide, not startled but alert. "Yes, Mr. Carter. Can you please let the captain know I would like to speak with him?" Rachel blinked. This wasn't a common request, not from any passenger, but from him. She nodded instantly. "Right away, sir." 5 minutes later, Captain Nolan Reed stepped into the front of the cabin. He didn't wear the smile flight crews use to calm nerves. He didn't pretend this was routine. He approached James and offered a small, respectful nod. "Mr. Carter, how can I assist you?" James stood, not abruptly, not aggressively, but with the steadiness of someone who was used to boardrooms and hard conversations. "Captain, I appreciate your professionalism today." Nolan nodded once. "I'd like to offer a brief word to your crew. Nothing public, nothing dramatic, just clarity." The captain hesitated. "Is this about the gate agent?" "It's about all of it," James replied. "It's about what my children saw, what your passengers saw, what your crew is still trying to make sense of." The captain looked toward the galley, then back at James. "I understand." "I don't want to cause disruption," James said, "but silence isn't protection anymore. Not for them, not for her, not for any of us." He motioned toward Marcus and Ava, now quietly watching. Captain Reed exhaled slowly. "Give me a few minutes. I'll make it happen." 15 minutes later, while cruising over Colorado, the captain made a calm, professional announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reed speaking. In a few moments, we will briefly pause regular cabin service for a special internal crew update. We thank you for your understanding." In the forward galley, Rachel gathered her fellow flight attendants. Even Lisa Brennan, still seated quietly near the rear, was summoned forward. The request came from the cockpit. It wasn't optional. She arrived with a stiff spine and folded arms, clearly tense. Rachel stepped back. Then James Carter stood up from 1A and walked forward. He didn't carry notes. No grand entrance. Just steady footsteps. He turned, facing the small semicircle of the crew. "I won't take long," he began, "but I want to say this with respect and clarity." The cabin behind him stayed mostly quiet, passengers aware, if not entirely understanding, what was happening. "This morning my family was stopped from boarding a flight we paid for. We were told without reason that we didn't belong. We were asked to step aside, not based on policy, but on perception." He looked toward Lisa. She didn't move. "This isn't about anger," he said. "This isn't about embarrassment. This is about understanding the cost of unchecked assumption." Rachel swallowed hard. "I don't need apologies. My children don't need pity. What we need, and what I believe you need, is to know that what happened today mattered." He paused. "Because what's worse than being mistreated is having it dismissed like nothing happened." Silence. Then he added softer now. "You don't have to raise your voice to change something. You just have to see it, own it, and do better next time." Then he simply nodded and returned to his seat. Back in her crew seat, Lisa felt like the oxygen had thinned. She wasn't angry anymore. She was exposed. And for the first time in years, she couldn't hide behind the phrase, "just following protocol," because she hadn't. She had made a call, a quiet, internal one. And now, it was echoing back louder than she ever expected. James sat down beside Olivia. She gently placed her hand over his. "That was more than a statement," she whispered. "No," James replied. "It was a mirror. And now, they have to decide whether or not to look into it." The morning after the flight, James Carter awoke to a flurry of notifications on his phone. Overnight, a fellow passenger had posted a video of his impromptu speech to the flight crew. The clip had gone viral, amassing millions of views and sparking widespread discussion. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting the incident as a glaring example of racial profiling in air travel. Social media platforms were abuzz with hashtags like #FlyFair and Carter Speaks, with users sharing their own experiences of discrimination. At the headquarters of the airline, executives convened an emergency meeting. The CEO, visibly distressed, addressed the team. "We have a crisis on our hands. This incident has struck a nerve nationwide. We need to respond swiftly and decisively." The company issued a public apology, acknowledging the mishandling of the situation and pledging to review their policies and training programs. Despite the apology, public outcry intensified. Civil rights organizations called for a thorough investigation, and some even demanded resignations within the airline's management. James Carter, meanwhile, remained composed. He declined interview requests, stating that his focus was on ensuring meaningful change rather than seeking personal attention. Behind the scenes, he began collaborating with advocacy groups to develop a framework for bias training and accountability within the airline industry. As the pressure mounted, the airline announced a partnership with these organizations to implement comprehensive reforms. The incident had not only exposed systemic issues, but also ignited a movement toward equity and respect in air travel. The next morning, the airline's sleek glass headquarters in Dallas buzzed with energy, but not the good kind. Phones rang nonstop, media requests piled up, PR inboxes were flooded. At 7:12 a.m., the CEO of the airline, Martin Kessler, walked into the executive boardroom with two legal advisors and a printed transcript of the now viral in-flight moment. He didn't speak for the first 10 seconds. Then he placed the paper on the table, looked up at the faces around him, marketing heads, legal officers, HR, and said, "Tell me why this happened. Tell me how a 15-year-old passenger's silence is trending louder than any campaign we've launched in the last year." Silence. Then someone from HR said quietly, "The employee involved, Lisa Brennan, has prior behavioral notes. She wasn't flagged for termination, but she's been cautioned before, several times." Martin's eyes narrowed. "And still, she was operating unsupervised at a first-class gate?" Another exec jumped in. "We're getting internal blowback too. Crew members on that flight have already filed informal complaints about her treatment of junior staff." "This isn't just a PR fire," Martin said. "It's a culture fire." Meanwhile, in a quiet kitchen in suburban Atlanta, Lisa Brennan sat at her table, staring blankly at the looping news footage on her tablet. Her name hadn't been released officially, but the internet doesn't wait for permission. A grainy image of her face, taken from a passenger's phone, was already circulating. The captions were merciless. "Gatekeeper or gate blocker? Prejudice in a polo shirt? The smile that denied first class." She hadn't slept. She'd barely eaten. And now, as her phone vibrated nonstop with missed calls from reporters, old colleagues, and a union rep, Lisa realized something terrifying. She was no longer in control of her story. "It was just one moment," she whispered to herself. But the voice inside her, the one she had ignored for years, whispered back, "No, it was every moment you never questioned." Back at the Carter residence, the mood was strangely calm. James Carter stood in the backyard, quietly sipping coffee. He scrolled through his phone, reading only one headline at a time. He didn't smile. He didn't post a statement. Olivia stepped out behind him and wrapped a blanket over his shoulders. "It's all over the news now," she said softly. "Even Ava saw something on her school app." James nodded. "I didn't want to go viral," he said. "I wanted accountability. You may have gotten both." He turned and looked her in the eyes. "We're not finished, Liv." On the flight crew's group chat, Rachel Monroe read the threads with a tight jaw. "He didn't raise his voice once. I've never seen a passenger handle it like that. I was embarrassed for our whole crew. We froze. Do you think Lisa's going to be let go? I don't think she's flying again. Not with us." Rachel closed the chat and placed her phone face down. She had been in the industry for over a decade. She had dealt with turbulence in the air, emergencies, even medical crises mid-flight. But none of that compared to what she saw in James Carter's eyes. He wasn't reacting. He was delivering. That evening, James received the call. He didn't answer the first time, or the second. He waited. Finally, on the third ring, he picked up. "Mr. Carter," the voice on the line said, "this is Martin Kessler." James said nothing for a beat. "I'm not interested in apologies," he finally replied. "I understand. That's not why I'm calling." Martin paused. "I want to meet, face to face. Not for PR, not for damage control. I want to understand what we're not seeing. That, James said calmly, would be a start. Back in her apartment, Lisa Brennan opened her email. A single message from corporate. Please report for an internal compliance review this Thursday. Your union representative may attend. No subject line, no warmth. Just a line of procedure that felt colder than termination. She stared at it. For years, she had felt untouchable, efficient, respected. But the truth had finally caught up. And this time, it had a face, a father, a mother, two children, calm, quiet, and a voice that didn't need to yell to be heard. The tension had peaked. By 4 p.m., the airline issued its second public statement. This one more personal, more direct. To the Carter family and to every passenger who has ever been made to feel unwelcome on our flights, we hear you. We failed, and we are changing. It was signed by CEO Martin Kessler. But the public wasn't done. News segments dove deeper. Journalists unearthed similar complaints about gate-level discrimination from years past. Former employees came forward anonymously, sharing stories of implicit bias in customer service evaluations. Civil rights attorneys began calling the Carter family's lawyer, offering help pro bono. Then came the first corporate blow. A major business-class travel partner temporarily suspended all executive bookings with the airline, citing alignment review with corporate values. Martin Kessler stared at the email on his screen. It was happening. We can't afford silence anymore, he said to his VP. Call the Carters. Personally, today. That evening, James received the call. He didn't answer the first time, or the second. He waited. Finally, on the third ring, he picked up. Mr. Carter, the voice on the line said, this is Martin Kessler. James said nothing for a beat. I'm not interested in apologies, he finally replied. I understand. That's not why I'm calling. Martin paused. I want to meet, face to face, not for PR, not for damage control. I want to understand what we're not seeing. That, James said calmly, would be a start. Back in her apartment, Lisa Brennan opened her email. A single message from corporate. Please report for an internal compliance review this Thursday. Your union representative may attend. No subject line, no warmth, just a line of procedure that felt colder than termination. She stared at it. For years, she had felt untouchable, efficient, respected. But the truth had finally caught up. And this time, it had a face, a father, a mother, two children, calm, quiet, and a voice that didn't need to yell to be heard. The tension had peaked. This was no longer about 4 first-class tickets. It was about every time someone had been told, without words, that they didn't belong. This time, someone answered back, and the world listened. The meeting with Martin Kessler was scheduled for the following week. James Carter, despite the mounting pressure, remained unshaken. He had nothing to prove, and he certainly didn't need any validation from a corporate giant. The media storm had died down, but the aftershocks were felt everywhere. Social media posts, hashtags, and videos still circulated, and the stories kept popping up in news feeds. James had become a symbol, not just for his family, but for anyone who had been ignored, dismissed, or silenced. His quiet dignity had turned him into an unwitting spokesperson for change. But on the day of the meeting with Kessler, something unexpected happened. James had just finished a quiet breakfast with Olivia when he received a call. It was from Rachel Monroe, the lead flight attendant from that fateful flight. Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I need to speak with you. It's important. James sat up, his brow furrowed. Is this about the airline's meeting with you? No, it's not about that, Rachel replied, her voice tense. It's about Lisa. She's been removed from duty, but there's something else. Something you need to know. A few hours later, James met Rachel at a small, quiet cafe in downtown Atlanta. She was visibly shaken when she sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly on the table. What's going on? James asked gently. What happened with Lisa? Rachel hesitated, looking around the cafe before speaking. It's not just Lisa. It's about all of us. And what happened at the gate wasn't just an isolated mistake. It was a part of something larger. James leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Go on. Rachel took a deep breath. The truth is, Lisa has been part of a culture within the airline that no one has been willing to address. There's been systemic bias in how employees are trained, how passengers are treated, and how those in power, like Lisa, use their authority. It's not just her fault. It's something that's been ingrained in the system for years. James sat back, digesting her words. For a moment, everything felt heavier, more complicated. But that's not what you're here to tell me, is it? He asked, sensing the urgency in Rachel's tone. No, Rachel said, her voice trembling. It's about you, about your family, the whole situation at the gate. It wasn't just about Lisa being prejudiced or dismissive. Someone else was involved, someone much higher up. James's heart raced. What do you mean? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You weren't just denied boarding by a flight attendant who made a mistake. You were blocked because someone made sure you wouldn't board that flight. Someone with enough influence to make sure it happened. And that person is a major shareholder in the airline. His name is Michael Harris. The name hit James like a punch to the gut. Michael Harris. He had heard the name before. The billionaire investor who owns stakes in several corporations, airlines included. But he had never connected the dots before. You're telling me that Michael Harris, the man who was sitting in first class with my family, had something to do with this? James's voice was low, controlled, but the storm inside him was building. Yes, Rachel confirmed. He's been pulling strings behind the scenes for years, using his influence to shape how this airline operates. The issue with Lisa was just the tip of the iceberg. James's mind raced. This whole time he had thought the problem was simply with an unprofessional gate agent. But now he realized the depth of the issue. It wasn't just one person. It was a system built on power and control, where the people at the top could manipulate situations to their benefit. Why didn't you say this sooner? James asked, his voice steady but tinged with anger. I couldn't, Rachel said, her eyes filled with regret. I'm just a flight attendant. I knew something was off, but I didn't have proof. And then when I saw what happened on the flight, I knew I had to tell you. This isn't just about one incident. This is about exposing a broken system. James stared at her, trying to piece together the puzzle. So you're saying that Michael Harris, who's invested in this airline, didn't want my family to board because of who we are? Because we weren't supposed to be in first class? His voice was rising now. Rachel nodded, her face grim. I know it sounds impossible, but it's the truth. And it goes deeper than that. Harris has been using his power to keep certain groups of people out of the most exclusive spaces, even if they have the right to be there. It's all about control, and your family, your story, has become the catalyst for everything. James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This isn't over. I'm going to take this to the highest level. I'm not going to let them get away with this. Rachel reached out and grabbed his arm. James, be careful. They'll try to shut this down. Harris has connections everywhere. This isn't just a fight for you. It's a fight for every person who's ever been silenced by people like him. Later that evening, James sat with Olivia, telling her everything Rachel had shared. They didn't speak for a long while. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. You know, James, when you made that call to the gate agent, you changed everything. You didn't just stand up for our family. You stood up for everyone who's ever been judged, dismissed, and overlooked. James exhaled slowly, the weight of it all sinking in. I didn't expect any of this to happen, he said quietly. I didn't want to be a symbol. But now, I can't walk away. Olivia placed her hand on his, her fingers warm and steady. Then let's make sure we're not the only ones speaking up. We'll take this to the top, and we won't stop until something changes. The next day, James went public with everything he knew about Michael Harris. It wasn't just a story of prejudice anymore. It was a story of power, manipulation, and corporate corruption. By the time the airline's legal team scrambled to respond, it was too late. The truth had been exposed, and James Carter wasn't backing down. The final twist was clear. James had not only uncovered a deep-seated issue within the airline, but he had also sparked a nationwide conversation about bias, power, and the unchecked influence of the wealthy. What had started as a simple act of standing up for his family had now turned into a much larger fight, one that would reshape how the airline and many other industries viewed their responsibility toward equality and justice. In the end, James didn't just fight for his family's right to fly in peace. He fought for everyone who had been pushed aside. And in doing so, he became the voice of change. 2 months later, James Carter sat at a small desk in a downtown conference room, surrounded by legal papers, contracts, and meeting notes. His phone vibrated on the table, but he didn't pick it up. The buzzing was a reminder that the story was still unfolding, but it no longer had the same hold on him. Today, he was focused on the next step, the one he hadn't planned for when he'd boarded that flight with his family 2 months ago. The fight had taken a toll on him, yes, but it had also sparked something in him, a deeper calling, one that demanded action, that demanded change. Across from him sat Olivia, her calm presence grounding him as always. The kids were with their grandmother in Seattle, the trip they had originally planned before the storm, finally taking place. For the first time in months, they were able to breathe. "So what now?" Olivia asked, her voice steady but with a hint of curiosity. James leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hand over his face. He'd spent the last few weeks working with advocacy groups, media outlets, and even some government officials who were eager to use his story as a springboard to push for systemic reforms. But the weight of it all, the magnitude of the change they were aiming for, still loomed large. "I'm not sure where to begin," James said honestly, "but I know where we can go. Together." The airline, under intense pressure, had made sweeping changes. Michael Harris had been forced to step down as a major shareholder, and an internal investigation was launched into bias training, hiring practices, and how employees at all levels were being held accountable. The flight attendants, those who had been part of the change, were now leading the way in discussions about equity and access. The media had stopped hounding them, but the legacy of the movement they had ignited lived on. News outlets, advocacy groups, and even some former airline employees had publicly thanked James and his family for bringing the issue into the spotlight. James had become a quiet but undeniable hero for many who had felt unseen, unheard, and undervalued. "What we're doing now," Olivia began, looking at him with pride, "it's more than just about the airline. It's about a wider change, isn't it?" James looked at her, his eyes clearer than they had been in a long time. "Yes," he said slowly, deliberately. "It's about everything that was ignored before, the way we're all connected, and how the smallest act of standing up, of making that one call, can set everything in motion." Later that evening, James found himself sitting in front of a camera once again, this time not for a crisis interview, but for a televised town hall. The moderator was a well-known civil rights journalist, and the room was filled with people eager to discuss the cultural and systemic shifts needed to end discrimination in air travel and beyond. James sat at the table, calm but aware of the weight of the moment. He wasn't just representing his family anymore. He was representing every family that had been told no without reason, dismissed without explanation. As the discussion unfolded, James spoke passionately but with restraint. He didn't shout or demand anything. He simply laid out the facts, told his story again, and explained what had to change. "What happened at the gate that day wasn't just about my family," James said into the microphone. "It was about the quiet assumptions we all make, about what we think people deserve, about who we think belongs where. It was about the power of silence in the face of that bias, and the power of speaking up.